Okay, so let's talk about Warren G. Harding. When you hear his name, your mind probably jumps straight to one word: scandal. And yep, there's a reason for that. But his presidency is this incredible paradox, a story of some really big achievements that got totally buried by epic levels of corruption. So let's dive in and unpack the surprising highs and the infamous lows of America's 29th president. First, you really have to get the vibe of the country that elected him. Picture it. It's 1920, and America is just spent. The nation is stumbling out of one of the most chaotic decades in its history. And frankly, people are desperate for a break. They just want things to feel normal again.
I mean, just look at what they were up against. The trauma of World War I was still raw. The Spanish flu had just killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. The economy was a total mess. You had skyrocketing inflation and massive labor strikes everywhere. On top of all that, there was horrific racial violence and a deep sense of political anxiety. This is a country that doesn't want a revolutionary, it wants a healer.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to look at Harding's promise of normalcy and, believe it or not, the major successes of his administration. Then we'll make the big pivot to the corruption that ended up defining his legacy. We'll get into the scandals, his sudden death, and what it all tells us about how we remember our leaders. And that brings us to the man himself, Warren G. Harding. He was a newspaper publisher and a senator from Ohio. Now, nobody really saw him as some political genius or a powerhouse, but he had exactly what America was looking for at that moment. His whole appeal was just simple and incredibly powerful. He looked the part, he sounded calm, stable, and friendly. And in a time of complete chaos, his promise to bring the country back to normalcy, well, that wasn't just a political slogan. It was music to the ears of a weary public, and they elected him in an absolute landslide.
And, for a while there, it really seemed like he was delivering on that promise. It's so easy to forget this part of the story, but the Harding administration actually had some major long-lasting accomplishments, both here at home and on the world stage.
This one was absolutely huge. Can you believe that before 1921, the U.S. government had no organized system for its spending? None. Harding's administration created the very first federal budget, a bureau to manage it, and an auditor to keep everyone honest. It's the basic foundation of the system we still use today. That's a big deal. His team also flexed some serious diplomatic muscle. After the horror of World War I, the world's biggest powers were already gearing up for a new naval arms race. Harding's conference brought them all to the table and produced the world's first ever arms limitation treaties. This was a massive step toward disarmament and honestly one of the biggest diplomatic wins of the entire decade.
And what about the economy? Well, Harding's policies were pretty straightforward. Cut taxes, especially for corporations, and slash government spending. And the result? The early 1920s kicked off a recovery with a ton of job growth and rising wages, helping to fuel the era we now call the Roaring Twenties.
So far, so good, right? You've got a popular president, the economy is picking up, and there are major policy wins on the board. But this is where the story takes a really dark turn, because Harding's greatest weakness wasn't his policies, it was the people he surrounded himself with.
It's almost like Harding himself knew what the real danger was. This quote from him is just tragically prophetic. His deep loyalty to his friends and his seeming inability to see their corruption would be the very thing that brought down his entire presidency.
So meet the Ohio Gang. That was the nickname for this crew of political buddies Harding brought with him from Ohio to Washington, D.C. Now, Harding was a very hands-off kind of leader. He trusted his cabinet to do their jobs, and while that worked out great for brilliant appointees like Herbert Hoover, it was an absolute disaster with these guys. They didn't see public service as a duty, they saw it as a golden ticket to get rich.
And that misplaced trust, that blind spot for his friends, led directly to one of the most notorious political scandals in all of American history. It's the one that would forever define the Harding presidency.
The Teapot Dome scandal. The name sounds a little funny, but what happened was an act of breathtaking corruption. Harding's very own Secretary of the Interior, a man named Albert Fall, secretly leased priceless, federally owned oil reserves to private oil companies. And in return, he got stuffed with cash, huge personal bribes.
And we're not talking about a little money. Fall took over $400,000 in bribes. In today's money, that's more than $7 million. The crime was so blatant, so outrageous, that Albert Fall became the very first cabinet member in U.S. history to be sent to prison for felonies he committed while in office.
But Teapot Dome wasn't just a one-off thing. Oh no, this was a pattern. The head of the Veterans Bureau was caught stealing millions of dollars, money that was meant to build hospitals for wounded World War I veterans. I mean, can you imagine? Even the Attorney General, the top cop in the country, was tangled up in bribery allegations. The corruption was just everywhere.
Now here's maybe the most unbelievable part of this whole story: the timing. While all of this rot and corruption was festering just beneath the surface, President Harding himself remained incredibly popular with the American people.
And this timeline is absolutely crucial to understanding his legacy. Harding died suddenly of a heart attack in August of 1923, before the biggest scandals became public knowledge. Think about that. He died a beloved president. It was only in the months and years after his death that the full ugly truth came out, completely destroying his reputation from beyond the grave.
So, how do we make sense of a presidency like this? When you really step back and look at the whole picture, his legacy is just a fascinating and frankly tragic study in contrasts.
On the one hand, you have real, solid achievements. He gave the country the calm it desperately needed. He modernized government finances in a way that lasts to this day, and he genuinely pushed for world peace. He even appointed some truly brilliant people to his cabinet. But on the other hand, my gosh, the scale of the corruption that ran wild under his nose is just shocking. His misplaced trust didn't just tarnish his name, it did serious damage to the public's faith in its own government. Which really leaves us with this final, tough question. By all accounts, Harding's personal intentions seem to have been good. He truly wanted to heal a wounded nation. But the actions of his administration, the crimes committed on his watch, were an absolute disaster. So what matters more when we judge a leader? What they meant to do, or what actually happened? That right there is the paradox of Warren G. Harding.